Okay, welcome everyone. I am so excited to have you guys in person today. So this is session 2 of our 2025 Restoration and Management Seminar Series, and I just appreciate seeing all your faces in person, and I appreciate the people that are joining from online. And so just a little bit about me. I'm Mallory. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at the center. If you saw the post on Facebook or the flyer, or maybe you got an email from me, I was the one doing some of the outreach for the seminar series, so to put a face behind the name, that's me. There's a lot of other people involved that got this kicked off, so I just want to say thank you and call out Ethan and Jennifer there in the back for helping me with tech there, our Green Iowa AmeriCorps members, serving 11 months with us this year, so thank you. And then perhaps in the parking lot you saw Addie, who is our undergraduate research assistant for the plant materials program. So their help was greatly appreciated in this process. But today I'm excited to introduce Kristine Nemec. She's our program manager for the county roadside vegetation programs across Iowa here at the TPC. Kristine received a BS in environmental studies and an MA in biology from the University of Nebraska Omaha, and then a PhD in natural resource sciences from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She's been with the center for 10 years now, so congratulations on that sort of milestone anniversary for you. And today she will discuss the growing number of Iowa cities developing roadside programs, Scott County's innovative Adopt-a-Prairie program, and the addition of new species into the roadsides. With that being said, just a couple housekeeping: cookies, water, coffee on the table over here. Bathrooms are around the corner and out the back hall. And we will have time for questions at the end. So with that being said, Kristine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, everyone, for the welcome. This is kind of a roadmap to the presentation today. It's divided into 4 segments. I'll start off with talking about the history of Iowa's roadside programs. Roadside programs today, both county and city. What goes into the seed mixes we provide to roadside programs. And I'll provide an overview of Scott County's Adopt-a-Prairie program. So we are here. We'll start off with a history of Iowa's roadside programs. Why does Iowa have this? So we'll go way back a few hundred years. This is the original extent of the Tallgrass Prairie. The green on the left shows where it covered quite a bit of the middle of the country. And it wasn't only Tallgrass Prairie, there was at least around 30 native nations. So that's what's on the right, outlined in purple, is roughly which native nations were in the Tallgrass Prairie region. And I just saw some people, that's from the native-land.ca website that shows the map of the different nations. One thing about Iowa, what's now known as Iowa, has a really rich soil, as of course most of us know. I moved here 10 years ago for this position, and in Nebraska, I thought our soil was dark, but I moved here and I was just amazed. There's definitely very rich organic soil here. It's an incredible resource, but that does mean that most of it was plowed. We lost about 99.9% of the Tallgrass Prairie in Iowa was converted, mostly to cropland, some to urban development, but a lot of it was lost in the 1800s. So the prairie that's left, most of it in Iowa is in these little patches, these islands in a sea of agriculture and other land use. Some of those remnants are in rights-of-way and railroad or road rights-of-way. So this is a photo from the Iowa DOT from 1914. And if you see in the foreground, there's some native prairie flowers there. Does anyone know what flowers those are? It appears to be blazing star. So this is a really nice remnant, never plowed prairie in a right-of-way. So that's part of what's left around the state. Now in the 1920s, the dirt roads got incredibly muddy during rains. This is kind of before gravel and pavement took on, so people would get really stuck. that's just the state of the road system in rural Iowa. Actually, most of Iowa during the 1920s. The 1930s, the state started to invest more in gravel and concrete, trying to improve those rural roads. And once the state started developing these roads, when you regrade the road, you create bare soil in the ditch. So it was very standard for many years to use cool season grasses such as tall fescue and smooth brome. They're cheap, they establish really quickly. That was just what was used and nothing was really thought about it. That's what went to the roadside when you had a project. In the 1960s and 70s, along with the growing environmental awareness, there started to be more and more interest in restoring or reconstructing Tallgrass Prairie in general, not just on the roadsides, but in general. There's these prairie restoration projects that came up. And these are some photos I found from the 1970s in Minnesota, the prairie project. In 1965, Lady Bird Johnson was one of the main reasons for the Highway Beautification Act, where there was funding for states to plant natives in their roadsides, and also to decrease the number of billboards. That hasn't been maybe as successful. If you've been along in our interstates, you know, there's a lot of billboards in some areas. But this was really the first formal push, I guess, to plant more natives, to beautify the roadsides. That was the main reasoning, is let's make our interstate system attractive. Here in Iowa, there's also a few people who started to study how can we plant native plants in the roadside. Roger Landers was a professor at Iowa State. I couldn't find any good photos of him, but Roger was one of the people in the 60s who started to study how to plant natives in roadsides. His student, Paul Christensen, who became a professor at Cornell College. Daryl Smith at UNI was another one who started to investigate how to plant natives. Because at this time, there was interest in, again, because the Beautification Act, more rest areas were being built across Iowa. And there was more interest in, well, how do we get them to establish? It's not the easiest environment to establish natives. In the 80s, the public became more and more concerned about groundwater quality. At that time, if there are weeds in the roadside, the state or the county would tend to just spray them, just nuke everything. It wasn't, oh, well, here's a patch of weeds, let's just get rid of that. It was just like, well, here's some weeds, let's spray everything around it. And all those herbicides would go into the roadsides, the ditches. So there's a study about, is there any way we can manage the ditches differently because of the water quality concerns? Around the same time, Bill Haywood, who worked for the Black Hawk County Conservation Department, he was a photographer, and he noticed when he took photos of the roadsides, when there was prairie vegetation, there weren't that many weeds. So he started to go around the state to these conferences, and he'd show photos. Here's a roadside with weeds, and here's a roadside with prairie, and there's not many weeds. It's slowing down the spread of the weeds. So he started to get counties more interested in, okay, let's try managing by planting prairie in the roadside. So between the groundwater quality and the concern about weeds, those seem to be the two main things that started to get more and more interest in roadside native vegetation. So in 1988, the Iowa legislature passed legislation about integrated roadside vegetation management. So they said it should be declared in the general public welfare of Iowa and a highway purpose for the vegetation of Iowa's roadsides to be preserved, planted, and maintained to be safe, visually interesting, ecologically integrated, and useful for many purposes. So this is an unusual piece of legislation. A lot of our environmental legislation is about one thing. Here's legislation for air quality. Here's legislation to protect endangered species. This is talking about ecologically integrated, useful for many purposes. So it's very forward-thinking and ecological and holistic, which is a little bit unusual for environmental legislation, especially at this time. So just in simpler terms, this style of roadside management is cost-effective, safe, environmentally sound management for roadsides. So at the same time, the legislature established the Living Roadway Trust Fund So this would be a stable source of funding to help support this style of management. And you need drills to plant the prairie seed. You need prescribed burn equipment, all that sort of thing. The counties wanted to do this kind of management, but they needed the equipment to do it. So the fund is made up of three sources of money. One is a road use tax fund. One is utility access fees. And one is REAP, or Resource Enhancement and Protection. That fund, that is another source of funding. So each year there's around $800,000 to $1 million available for counties, cities, state entities to apply for grants that can help support the roadside programs.
Is that $88 that you're talking there? Is
That's
current?
That's current. The last few years we've averaged 800,000 to $1 million. That's a great question. This is how the pie has always been set up, but the actual amount that reflects current amount. So it's fairly competitive. It just depends on how many counties and cities and state apply for grants. But a lot of them can get a grant through this fund, and that's unusual. I have other states coming to me. We want to get this set up. Well, this is why we're able to do it here, because we have a fund that was set up in the late 80s. So Minnesota, for example, they passed similar legislation just a couple of years ago. The Highway for Habitat bill, they're only doing it at the state level. Iowa's unusual because we're also doing it at the local, the county and city level. But Minnesota is trying to emulate this type of funding for their state highways, at least. So as I mentioned, grants are available to eligible cities, counties. Applicants with a statewide impact, so nonprofits can apply, researchers can apply if their research benefits roadside vegetation. But if any entity wants to apply for any city or county, they need to have a plan on file with the Iowa DOT. So that's the history. That's how we got to where we are, why Iowa has this support. So next I'll talk about roadside programs today. So about 10 years ago, the DOT, they changed the requirements of what has to go into a plan. They made it a little bit more detailed. It's not overwhelming, but they made it a little bit more structured. So this reflects how many counties have this new style of plan over the last 10 years. So if it's a green circle, the county has a plan that's been updated within the last 5 years. If it's yellow, they made their plan maybe 6 to 10 years ago. And we don't have any in red, but there's a couple of empty circles that just means they're just starting to develop a plan, Tama and Fremont County. So right now we're at 62 counties with plans, which is pretty good. The participation kind of fluctuates, but we're on an increase with this new style of plan. More and more counties are deciding to adopt it. And most of these counties, not all, have a roadside vegetation manager. So that's someone on staff. It's someone usually with a biological background. Their only task is to implement the plan. Now, something that's kind of new is the increase in city plans. So counties have always been really interested, but the last several years, the DOT has really encouraged cities to get involved. And we're up to 25 cities now. I have most of them listed on the left. I guess Council Bluffs is developing a plan too. So they're one of the larger cities that's developing one. So as you can see, this ranges from very small cities. We have Center Point all the way up to Iowa City. So cities of pretty much any size can apply for grants and get a plan. So if you happen to be here and want to learn more about how your city can get a program, if it's not on that list, Trees Forever works closely with the DOT to encourage cities to get involved. In my role, I tend to work more with counties, but I certainly want to help spread the word about cities. And they're having a bunch of upcoming webinars. If you go to this website, you can sign up for one of these webinars and learn how your city can get involved. Now, I'm just curious, is everyone in the room, is anyone here not from Black Hawk County? Are you all local to Black Hawk County? Okay, good to know. And if people online want to enter where they're from, I'm just always curious where people are joining in from. I imagine you might be outside of Black Hawk County, some of you. But Cedar Falls does have a plan. Waterloo doesn't at this point, but who knows, they might get interested with the neighbor having a plan. Does anyone enter where they're at in the chat?
Someone said Jackson County.
Jackson County, okay.
Johnson, Muscatine.
Okay. So Johnson and Muscatine, Jackson, Butler County,
Carver County.
which county?
Carver County,
In
Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Oh, Carver County, Minnesota, okay. Welcome. Marion County. All right, well, thanks for letting me know. Marion County, so mostly Iowa counties, also Minnesota. That kind of represents how we tend to get people around the state and neighboring states on our webinars, so good to know. And if you want to learn more about county roadside programs, twice a year, I work with the DOT to co-host a webinar that's more directed at counties. So our next one is coming up on Wednesday, April 2nd at noon. So if you're interested in that, just send me an email. At the end of the presentation, I'll have my contact information again. But just in case someone's calling in, most of those counties have programs from Iowa that I recognized, maybe all of them. But this is the next opportunity to learn how counties can get involved. All right, so let's say a county has a program. What do they do? What's in the plan? Well, I'll talk about the main activities, the main benefits a county or city has if they have a plan. So one is brush control. This is a before and after photo of a section of road in Mahaska County after the roadside manager went in with some equipment and cleared the brush, the cedars, it looks like. So some people get really attached to the trees and shrubs in the roadside, but they are a safety issue. Federal Highway Administration says that anything more than 4 inches in diameter at breast height is a safety hazard. So it doesn't have to be that big. Once it's more than 4 inches within a certain distance of the road, it's just a safety hazard. So one of the benefits of having a roadside manager is that they can prioritize. They have that big picture view of what's going on in the county. They can get a grant to get a roadside inventory. They can hire a contractor who maps out all this stuff, and they can decide, well, which is the worst safety issue? So that's one benefit. It's having that county person as opposed to contracting it out to a bunch of contractors, which in some counties works, I guess, but having one person who's accountable for all the roadsides, they can prioritize which brush to remove. Weed control. Now, counties are required to have a weed commissioner according to Iowa code. Often that's a part-time position. Sometimes the engineer is the weed commissioner. I'd say quite a few most of the roadside managers are also the weed commissioner, not all of them. So that's part of their many duties is controlling weeds. They do use some herbicides. Some of the invasives, it's hard to get rid of without herbicides. It's a necessary evil. So it's not like they never use herbicides. It's just, that's how you have to get rid of some of the weeds to have a net benefit. But unlike the 80s, it's targeted, it's strategic. You just target which one to try not to affect the nearby vegetation. So I've just got back from the Iowa Invasive Species Conference. I went to that last week. And something that was kind of fun that was done, they surveyed everyone who was in attendance. So people who attend are mostly weed commissioners, roadside managers, county conservation employees. And they determined, according to that audience at least, what they think the most invasive species is in Iowa. Does anyone have any guesses what they might have voted on as the worst invasive, just most difficult to get rid of? It's just causes so much damage. It's hard to control. What would that be? Any guesses? Patty? Reed canary grass. That was one of the top ones.
The ridiculously tall sunflowers, Maximilia's.
Oh, Maximilian sunflower, it can be aggressive. It has some wildlife benefits, but it can be aggressive.
Garlic mustard.
That's a bad one too. Garlic mustard is crown vetch. All of these are good, very aggressive. Any guesses online?
There was honeysuckle,
Honeysuckle,
Queen Anne's lace,
Queen Anne's lace,
bromus inermis.
bromus inermis, smooth brome. Okay. There's a vote for multiflora rose. Many of these were part of the voting. They framed it like a Sweet 16 tournament. We start out with 16 and you had to pair, like, which is the worst of these two? And they gradually narrowed it down to the final 4 and then the championship to get the worst invasive species. It's very clever and fun. And once you got to the final 4, people had to justify their answer. But many of the species not all, but many of the species you mentioned were on that tournament. But here was the winner, is Japanese knotweed. And Canada thistle was second. I think because in rural areas, landowners complain about Canada thistle a lot, so they get a lot of complaints about that. But Japanese knotweed is newer to Iowa, but I think they voted it number 1 because it's incredibly destructive. So why they voted Japanese knotweed number 1? And again, this wasn't universal, but overall, people voted it number 1. It can actually penetrate through concrete. And it's native Japan. It colonizes volcano lava. So it can penetrate volcano lava, like just really hard substances. So these photos are from a British company that only controls knotweed. And it shows how it can penetrate the concrete. And at the conference, someone showed photos of some houses in Des Moines where it penetrates the foundation and the walls. And it just forms these really dense patches. Like in prairie, it can form these really dense patches. It has these underground stems that can go up to 60, 70 feet. And it's just one of those things that are really difficult to control. And this power alone, I think, is why they named it invasive, because it can damage infrastructure. And if you've never used EdMaps, EDD Maps, it's kind of a nice website that shows where invasive species are. So this is where it's been documented in Iowa. So I thought this was interesting, that I don't think about it that much, but just when I learned more about it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a pretty destructive plant in ecosystems and for infrastructure. The EdMaps shows it is in Blackhawk County. So just something to be aware of. So weed control, that's a big benefit the roadside managers provide. Prescribed burning, that's another great way to keep woodies out of the roadsides, to keep on top of invasives. I did a survey of the counties several years ago, and around half of the counties do prescribed burning. Not all of them have the expertise or the time or the equipment to do prescribed burning. You have to be careful. At least, the county roadsides don't have as much traffic, so it's not as bad as maybe state. Planting native plants. As probably a lot of us here know, that native prairie plants have tremendously thick, dense, deep root systems, so they're better at erosion control on those steep roadside slopes. So from a very practical benefit to counties, they want to reduce erosion on the slopes. So on the left, you can see this kind of classic drawing that shows how deep smooth brome roots are. Remember, smooth brome is still planted in many parts of the roadside because natives aren't appropriate for everywhere, compared to the deeper root systems of native plants. And this photo is from 6-year-old roots grown in urban prairie. It's a cross section we did last summer. So even just a 6-year-old plants they're developing some really dense root systems. So many of the counties will hydroseed, which means they have this is a hydroseeder piece of equipment, this type of truck, and they will spray the roadsides with a slurry of seed, water, dye, and mulch. So this is safer than drilling on a lot of sites. Some of the roadsides are a little steep for a drill. So it's a good investment for the county. And this is, again, something they can get a grant toward. The grant covers about 80% of the cost of equipment like this. So it looks like a lot of fun. I've never hydro-seeded, but it sounds, you just spray the slurry on and the dye indicates, yes, something was done here. So the public knows it's not just bare soil. So that's a major aspect of programs. All right, next we'll go into the seed mixes. What do we provide the counties for their hydro-seed or drills? So in the 1990s, counties would individually apply for a grant. Each one would say, I want this much seed. Can I get a grant from the Living Roadway Trust Fund? But Kirk Henderson, who was in my position for a little over 20 years, one of my predecessors, in 1998, he was able to get a grant for a large scale purchase of the seed as opposed to having these little individual grants. So he just asked the counties, how much do you want? And then he got this large grant. So this has been a big benefit to the program because they just come to the center once a year. They pick up how much seed they've requested. They requested ahead of time and they can use it in their roadsides. So it's mostly been through a federal highway grant. That's what he initially got. The last couple of years, we've also gotten money from the fund. We prefer to use the fund more for equipment, but if we absolutely need to, we can use it for seed. And the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, that's a new funding source. So this is how much seed we provided last year. The white bags, big poofy white bags are the native grasses. The boxes contain little bags of wildflower and sedge seed. So last year we provided 13,000 pounds of seed to 40 counties around the state. And we provide 2 seed mixes. One is a slightly less diverse seed mix of 9 grass and sedge species, on average around 25 wildflower species. This is worth around 150 to 270 an acre. Diversity mix, 12 grass and sedge species, on average 34, 35 wildflower species. This is kind of the range of what we provide, 220 to 350 an acre. So again, this is a nice value to the counties. They don't have to pay anything for this. They get this for free because I get this through a grant. They have to provide the labor, the expertise, the equipment to plant it and maintain it. But these are good quality seed mixes. A lot of them have their heritage in our seed production plots out back. So it's yellow tag seed that Laura Walter has gone out. She's collected it from native prairies. She's grown it out in the seed production plots. She gives it to the commercial seed companies, and then I buy it from them. So about 85% of the seed I get is that yellow tag seed that has its genetic heritage to the unplowed prairie remnants.
What does clean out mix mean? What's clean out?
So a lot of the projects they're done because of road regrading. Okay, they create bare soil, but some of the projects, soil erodes from the neighboring farmland into the ditch, so it plugs the ditch, and the county has to pay to excavate that soil out. And that's called a ditch clean out, when you have to excavate eroded soil. So the clean out mix, we don't want to spend quite as much money because if that land erodes once, odds are it might erode again. So they might have to go in and clean it out, but they try not to. But certain situations, certain parts of the county, they're prone to erosion depending on the neighboring land use and land use erosion control practices. So that's why there's a difference. So it's about a 4-day process. Once a year, a couple days, I have volunteers help me. Often it's AmeriCorps members, it's UNI students. Last year, Trees Forever staff came out and helped, and they helped gather some community members. We had some people from the city of Marion, employees came out and helped. And the volunteers are essential because they help organize the seed, they help load it into the vehicles. So it's a great volunteer opportunity. We pay the students, of course, and AmeriCorps members are awesome. They just help us out with so many things at the center. And this is an example where we need a lot of hands to help us organize and load the seed. So one common question I get, people want to know, well, what's in the seed mixes? These are the typical species provided, the classic big 4, the big blue stem, the little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass. There's really common, typical prairie species. Also do Canada wild rye or Virginia wild rye, rough drop seed, Cytotes grama. At least one sedge. The diversity mix usually gets 2 or 3 sedges. So these are all pretty commercially available, usually affordable. prices vary, but these are pretty standard. And of course, for the pollinator value, for the beauty, we add wildflowers. We have early blooming species. Now this is what the roadside managers want the most. They want early blooming species so it shows the landowners and the public, yes, there's something here, it's not weeds. So we try to put as many as we can, but if anyone who's restored prairie, most of the species tend to bloom in the summer, but we include what we can for early blooming, which is like golden Alexanders, beard's tongue, foxglove beard tongue, indigo. And then there's plenty of summer blooming species. This is just select examples of what we can pretty reliably find when we order our seed. And then fall blooming species like New England aster, smooth blue aster, showy goldenrod. And we also make sure we include at least 1 or 2 milkweed species. Now, we don't include common milkweed, not because it's controversial. I know some people don't like common milkweed. Like landowners think it's, they don't want it to get into their land, that sort of thing. It's not that. It's just because common milkweed spreads on its own pretty well in the roadside. So we don't have to put it in. It's already out there. We don't need to include it in the mixes. So what we do include is butterfly milkweed and swamp or rose milkweed, because they don't spread quite as easily on their own. And the butterfly milkweed is just so showy and striking, those orange flowers, and the monarchs will use that as well as the rose milkweed. And so that shows the Saragota or roadside manager inspecting milkweed, a common milkweed plant, to see if there's any monarchs on it. So for many years, the species I just showed you have been in the seed mixes, but it's nice to add some new species now and then just to see how they do. I'm very fortunate because I work at the Tallgrass Prairie Center and we have so many knowledgeable people. Justin Meissen and Laura Walter spend a lot more time thinking about botany and prairie species than I do. So I want some ideas for new species to add. I just talk to them. And it's great just having that knowledge right here. And so every couple of years or so, I'll just ask them, hey, any ideas, anything new that might be commercially available we haven't used before that would do well in the challenging environment of roadsides? And Justin also designed the seed mix for our project right up front, because when the high school was built, they had to regrade our road and we had to reseed it. So it'll be fun to see how that comes up. So last year, for example, here's the species, 3 species they suggested: wild quinine, parasol white top, and grassleaf goldenrod. So I don't see these included in prairie mixes maybe as much as some of the other stuff, but I guess they're becoming more commercially available. They thought they would do well. So I did order these 3, but wild quinine was the only one that was available. So that's the downside to adding new species. You just have to keep trying every year. And it also gives a signal to the seed producers that, hey, I'm kind of interested in this species. So if I keep requesting it, they might start growing it more because this is a large seed purchase. And so that's one thing that helps create the demand, is people just request certain species they want to see. And if enough people request it, they might make it more, they might be able to grow more seed and provide it. But I was able to provide wild quinine, so that was fun to do something new. So that's about as scientific as it gets, just getting that knowledge, and we discuss it, and then I try it out and see if I can get the species. And I just mentioned the national importance of Iowa roadside programs, or basically anything we do for native plants in Iowa are nationally important. So Iowa's kind of unique because it's pretty much entirely within the summer flyway of the monarch butterfly. As many people know, the monarch butterfly is declining. The previous winter, it had its 2nd lowest count in Mexico on record. And Iowa's right within that flyway. We're right within that prime area for habitat. So roadsides are one piece, not everything. I mean, there's only so much, you can't put everything on roadsides, but whatever habitat we can get on the landscape is going to be important. And by now, many people may have known that they talked about what we're doing in Iowa, not just the roadsides, but what our partners are doing in Iowa to help restore prairie habitat and how that's important for the monarch butterfly. All right, the last segment, I'll just talk about Scott County's Adopt-a-Prairie program. And I will say not every county can do this. Every county is unique in the resources they have or public support and finances. But this is kind of a fun program that shows how this roadside manager has been able to get a lot of public support for prairie and roadsides. So this is Brian Burkholder. Scott County developed a program for the first time in 2017. So they had a committee, they developed a plan, they hired Brian. And a couple of years into his program, he was talking to his committee because he chose to have an advisory committee. So we recommend, not every roadside manager will do this, but we recommend they have an advisory committee. So this is people from the community. It's maybe landowners or conservation people, soil and water conservation. And they meet once or twice a year and they just discuss, how is this program doing? What's he up to? You know, does he need any support? They can talk about his program to the schools or whatever, like that sort of thing. And they were saying, well, what can you do to get more public support or knowledge of what you're doing? And he thought, well, there's that Adopt-a-Roadside program where people go and pick up trash. Why don't we do something like Adopt-a-Prairie program where they can request to have prairie planted in the roadside by their property? So that started around 2019. He developed this program. So the county has a website where rural landowners can go in. Again, it has to be county road, so it's not, most of it's not in the urban areas. So they just fill out a form. They request, oh, I want prairie planted in the roadside. They say if they want to help manage it or not. I guess he'll get it started. He'll do the weed control in the first few years, but after that, if they want, they can manage the weeds themselves. And I guess a lot of people do request to manage the weeds themselves. They like that sense of ownership of that piece of prairie in the roadside by their property. And the county has a nice GIS program they've mapped where all these pieces have been planted within the county. And they have 72 people who have participated in the last 5 years, which is pretty amazing. Again, not everyone has the capacity or time to do this, but he's able to accommodate this. Some counties will plant upon request. They don't have a formal large-scale program like this, but people are always welcome to at least ask their county roadside managers, is this something you can accommodate? And some may or may not be able to. But this is an example of how he's been able to scale up and plant where people want. And just in case people don't know, like I know we have people from out of state, Scott County is where Davenport is. So it's on the eastern part of the state. So you have a large urban area. So that's where Scott County is. So here's a couple of people who've benefited from this program. One is corn soybean farmer Hans Schneekloff. So he's a conventional corn soybean farmer, but he requested to have prairie planted because he said he wanted to kind of offset his day job. He thought it was neat that this prairie could provide corridors, or at least around his property, could provide some corridors for pollinators. His wife and kids love the flowers. They make bouquets. He just really enjoys having the habitat, the prairie right there by his farm, by his fields. He's not worried about the prairie plants spreading to the fields or anything like that. So he's one example of someone who signed up. Another person was Kathy LaFrenz. She owns a U-Pick flower farm in rural Scott County. And she asked to have it planted in honor of her late husband, Cliff, who passed away in early 2020. And they both love native flowers. He especially would drive around the county. He's always asking, what's this flower? What's this flower? He loved the yellow flowers. She said he was all about the yellow flowers. So when she heard about this program, she knew she just had to request to have prairie in her roadside to honor him. So these are some before and after photos of what it looks like. And she's very pleased with how that turned out. So the reason I'm familiar with those two people in particular is because I interviewed them as part of an article I wrote for Wild Ones Journal. I don't know if anyone here belongs to Wild Ones or has heard about them. But Wild Ones is a national nonprofit that helps people learn how to plant natives in their yards. So a lot of it's more small scale, but I think some people do a little bit larger scale, but just basically resources. And they have a quarterly journal. So anyway, I pitched the idea. I thought it'd be nice for other people just to know about this program, just in case other counties wanted to try to emulate it, not necessarily in Iowa, but wherever. It's just a good thing that people are appreciating. And it's one way to get natives near their property. So that'll be in the spring issue, but initially it's just for subscribers, and it'll be available for anyone in a few more months, after a few months have passed and they put it online. So that's what I had for you today, just kind of an overview of some of the things that are going on with the program. I think cities getting more involved, the Adopt-a-Prairie program, that's something that's new. Some of you may have been familiar with this program for some time. It's been around a while, but those are some new developments. And I just shared how I try to incorporate some new species now and then to the seed mixes. So this is my contact information. This is the website where you can learn more about roadsides, my email, phone number. We're also on social media. So we have a Facebook page, Instagram page, and YouTube page. Now on the YouTube page, another new project I didn't mention is I got a grant to interview Iowa farmers who don't mind having prairie plants in their roadside. And if you follow our Facebook page, you may have seen some of these videos. I know not everyone has Facebook or Instagram, but they're also on our YouTube page. So if you just search Iowa Roadside Management, you can find our channel if you want to see the videos. They're short little 40-second to 1-minute videos. So we've been pushing those out on social media because we want to spread the word that, there's some landowners there that don't mind the prairie plants. Some will spray it and kill the plants. They don't like them, they're weeds, but others appreciate having the plants on the roadside. Another thing I'll mention about the YouTube channel, I showed that photo from the 1920s of the car stuck in the mud. I linked to the Iowa DOT has a nice video called Out of the Mud. So this Out of the Mud video is about 20 minutes long, but it talks about the history of Iowa's road system. And it's pretty interesting. They have video of the cars getting stuck in the mud. And they tell the story about after a big game between University of Iowa and Minnesota, like 1,600 people got stuck in the mud on their way home. And that's when they started realizing maybe we should get pavement. So it's kind of a fun little video. And that's on the Iowa DOT YouTube, or I linked to it from the YouTube, but another kind of resource to learn more about roadsides. All right, with that, I'd like to thank our tech crew, Mallory and Jennifer and Ethan. I know hybrid is not the easiest type of presentation, but they took care ahead of time to make sure everything went well and tried to make it easy for the speakers. I appreciate their help today. Are there any questions?
How many commercial growers do you work with?
Well, I let the seed out for bid every spring. So it's out, anyone can bid on it. But I also try to prioritize that it's that yellow tag seed that originally originates from Iowa native prairies that have never been plowed. So usually we have 3 vendors bid on it. So as far as that, me directly buying seed, we have 3 companies that bid on the seed. But it goes out to around 50. It's widely advertised. I have a whole list, but there's 3 that can afford to provide the seed, the quantity of seed that I need.
Yeah, we have a couple online. So the first one is, what underrepresented graminoid species would you like to see added to your seed bank for roadside seed mixes?
So the question is, what graminoid species that I'd like to see added to the seed bank? I would like to see prairie cordgrass be a little bit cheaper. I've bought prairie cordgrass now and then. It's a wet loving species, but it's fairly expensive.
Next one is there any resources that lay out a cost analysis of converting, planting, and managing right-of-ways as native vegetation versus managing right-of-ways with a broadcast spray mow management plan?
So the question was, has there been any cost analysis of doing one method versus another when you're seeding?
Yes.
We have the cost. Like I know for one of my grants, I have to turn in the costs associated with hydroseeding versus drilling. It is quite a bit more expensive to hydroseed because there's mulch involved, there's the equipment, the truck versus a small drill. But it's also a lot more convenient in the sense that it's a lot safer to manage the hydroseeder. Once a county invests in the hydroseeder, and if they're going to use it a lot, it can be a good investment. But for one individual project, it's more expensive. I want to say something like 3 to 4 times more expensive to hydroseed versus drilling.
Then we have one more. Are there any analogous programs for state and interstate roads?
Are there any analogous programs for state and interstate roads? There are some states that have gotten into this. Texas has a long-running program as well, North Carolina. Minnesota has kind of gone in and out. They had Roadsides for Wildlife was a campaign they had in the 90s, I think, maybe in the 2000s. So there's the one that come to the top of my head, North Carolina, Texas. I think Indiana does it to some extent. Kentucky is starting to do more pollinator planting, Ohio. So the extent of their programs vary, but I've been to different conferences and heard these people from these states talk about their programs. So at that state level, there's certainly other states doing this. Yes, Mary.
When I talked to the county supervisor about why they don't have a program there when they're so close to you guys, you know. And he's always very kind and patient with me. But he said that about 10 years ago, the grant proposals got so complicated, he didn't have the clerical help to help him do it. So he dropped the program.
So which county is this, Blackhawk?
Butler,
Butler County.
I don't know anything about it. I mean, he was very kind and he said he'd like to have the program, but he didn't have the clerical help to help him write out the grant proposals.
Okay. So Butler County, the supervisor said they don't have a program because they don't have the clerical help to fill out the grant proposals. Now, it does take resources. Someone on staff needs to fill out the grant proposal, and then you need someone on staff to implement the grant, to manage the equipment, run it, that sort of thing. So that's one reason some counties hire a roadside manager, because that's their job, is to apply for the grants and manage it.
They used to have about 10 years ago, they had a roadside manager. He was also the weed commissioner.
Okay.
Like you said. And but then when the clerical got too much, he had to drop it. He said, but he says he does all he can on his own. And he told me exactly where I could go and see what he's done. So it seems like he's trying by himself.
Yeah, it's not easy if you're the only person. There's some counties where the engineer does this, but maybe they have good help or something. You have to have the capacity to help to do this.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a national program, something about a monarch corridor
Oh, yes.
that was supposed to, did that follow 35 or where
It was like he had-
Yeah.
where's that at now? Do you know much about it?
I haven't heard anything on it lately. I think my first year or two on the position, like 2015, 2016, I went to a meeting where they were talking about that, like the states, how can we coordinate to get monarch habitat all along I-35, all across these states? But I just haven't heard anything the last 4 years or so.
There's a sign on, there is a
Yeah, I've
sign
seen the sign.
on 35 as you're going north, there's a
I've seen
sign
that. I didn't know the
somewhere.
program was still viable.
I just haven't heard. Doesn't mean it's not going, but I go to a fair amount of pollinator, like national pollinator. I just haven't heard about it. Maybe they just haven't done a lot of publicity, or they're not really moving forward very fast.
Probably funding.
What is the biggest impediment to counties not doing a program?
All right. So the question was, what is the biggest impediment to counties not doing a program? I think one of the biggest impediments is just not a priority. They just see other things in the county being a priority. I surveyed county officials several years ago, and they're all about the roads and bridges, but the vegetation affects what goes on with the roads and bridges. If you have Japanese knotweed, you might not have roads. So it's just other things are a higher priority, or the jobs, or I think part of it is just communication, helping them see the benefits and how it can have a cost. It can be cost effective. And sometimes it's political, because some of the landowners do not like prairie and the roadsides. They're worried about the seed mixes. They're worried about the plants spreading into their roadsides. I think that's, in some counties, that's the impediment, just that political pushback. We don't want weeds in our roads. And it's a cultural thing that's hard to overcome.
When you do get pushback like that, you know, I've seen with landowners that say they don't want it next to them, the weeds will spread into their row crops, or like if they pasture cattle or horses, what have you. How do you frame your conversation to sort of combat that idea?
So the question was, how do you combat that hesitation that farmers might have, like when they're saying, well, it's just going to spread into my fields, my pasture. One thing we've tried to do is these videos to say, well, actually landowners who do have prairie say it's not spreading, and conventionally farmed crops, when there's so much applied to those conventional crops, it kills out the prairie plants. So most of the species aren't going to be able to spread anyway because of the herbicides. It gets rid of everything.
So how do you overcome that argument? There-
Well, all we can do is just say, like, this has been the experience of other landowners. We haven't seen it spread. A tile camera, that's another thing that comes up. Well, the prairie roots are just gonna infiltrate my tile lines, but Iowa State and the Tallgrass Prairie Center has put little cameras down in the tile line. We have video. We have video on our website. Iowa State Strips program has video on their website that shows it doesn't penetrate tile lines. Corn actually had slightly more roots, or cottonwoods especially, but the prairie plants don't really. So all we can do is say, this is what we found. And it's up to them. And some people just want to believe their peers or certain people. So as the expert, like all you can do is present the information.
Have you seen a change in attitude in the 10 years you've been here?
Have I seen a change in attitude in the 10 years I've been here? Anecdotally, I've heard people around the state say, with the concern about monarchs, they're seeing some of their neighbors mow around the milkweeds. So that word's getting out. People understand milkweeds. Oh yes, that's important for monarchs. So they'll mow around that, but that's important for the larvae. You still need other plants for the adults. So I still think we need more improvement in that, just getting people to understand these prairie flowers are what the adult monarchs need. It's not all about the milkweed. That's part of it. But that's why we need the bee balm or the golden alexanders, the asters, especially when the monarchs are migrating south. They need nutrition, they need fuel. So they need other species, plant species, to fuel their flight. But I think things are gradually getting better. I've heard in urban areas, there's been more acceptance of native prairie plantings. I mean, I think gradually things are getting better. Annie?
What's the benefit of using the bidding or auction system that you do for seed?
Well, the benefit of doing the auction system is it's pretty much kind of required by the university. So it's just for fairness and all that sort of thing. We have to open it up to public bid and have a list of people we give it to. We can make certain preferences, like that pricing preference, or we can, like, occasionally I've gotten bids from like Oregon or Kentucky, and I'm okay. Like, I can, even if it's the cheapest thing, I'm allowed to say, well, no, that biologically that doesn't make sense. So there's that legal aspect, but there's also some flexibility, just like common sense or biological knowledge. You don't have to always accept the lowest bid, but within reason, like anything in Iowa. But that's, most of my seed comes from Iowa.
There's another question in the chat. Do you have plans to create a map like Scott County?
Do I have plans to create a map like Scott County? So this would be like for everything that's planted. I guess that I provide seed. So when I provide the seed to the counties as part of the grant, they have to record where they planted. Many of them will do that on paper maps. Some of them have it online. And a lot of these sites are small. So I did get a grant when I was new. I got some money to digitize some of this, but it's just a tremendous amount of work because there's so many. There's 40 counties. Let's say each one plants 10 to 40 sites each year. And that's a lot to digitize. But the DOT is trying to come up with an app on the phone, so it'll be a lot easier, and trying to figure out some way we can systemize this. So it's a target that's just challenging because you're dealing with all these different counties with many different levels of knowledge or comfort with apps. But it'd be nice if we get most of them to use it, and then those that aren't comfortable, then we can pay to digitize it. But it's something we would like to digitize all the plantings. It's just it's complicated and you need money.
How much maintenance do these roadsides prairies require? Does it depend a lot, or?
So how much maintenance the roadside prairies require? As with other prairies, the hardest part is that first year or two, because the prairies plants take a while. They're putting down their roots the first couple of years. They're small. So you want to control the weeds that will shade out the plants. So some of the counties, they will do that mowing that first year or so, regular mowing to some of the sites to help prevent the shading. But once they get established after around 3 years, like other prairies, then they need less maintenance. Maybe they'll need burned every now and then. Or maybe they need to go in and remove some invasive. So it really depends on the site, but once they get established, that's one of the benefits. They tend to need less maintenance. They can help slow down the spread of weeds. But it depends on the site. Like I've heard some roadside managers say, well, I just left this one site alone. I didn't have time to mow it. That's my best site. I don't know why. So it's so variable. It depends on the seed bank, the slope at that site, what it's getting from the neighboring farmland. If the farmer ever interferes with it, but they just do the best they can to get these established. And then in the long run, they don't need as much maintenance. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. We have free roadside calendars and other materials related to the center up front if you want to take a look at those on your way out. Thank you.